So it's 5:30. We'll go ahead and start our joint finance committee / workshop, whatever we're calling it these days. Thank you for everyone who's here and everyone who's online. As with all our meetings, we do have a section that's going to have an opportunity for community engagement. So if there's things you hear as you move along, we will be reaching out. And for Mr. Haney and Mr. Brand, before I proceed, I wanted to see if there were any questions in particular that you had for this evening, or if you want me to just start in.
You can get started, as far as I'm concerned.
Just start, please.
Okay.
Please start.
So I do want to note that yesterday I was over at the school offices. I met with the superintendent, the interim finance director, and finance specialist. And the team, it was a very collaborative meeting, and I'm looking forward to further engagement. It looks like the team has surfaced some information that will go a long way towards explaining the $2 million difference in revenue last fall. So they're in the final stages of looking at that information, and hopefully by Monday's school board meeting that will all be settled. So I thought that was a very positive development. What I wanted to do tonight is follow up. Last month we had started talking about revenues and expenses, and we had someone in the audience that had suggested we do a year-over-year review. So what I wanted to do was provide that information to you. I have a little bit of caffeine here, so if I tend to talk too fast, somebody has to slow me down. If I talk faster than I normally talk, go ahead and slow me down. I also want to make sure we finish at 6:30 because I do believe you have another meeting. So what I did was I took a look at the expense and revenue reports from last year. So what you have is a handout. There were some handouts available out front, and for anyone who's online, we'll get these posted, but right now they're not online. We did a year-over-year comparison. So what you have is where finance revenue, where the revenue stood in January of 2024, where the revenue is today in 2025. And that these are the January reports. And you'll see that we're roughly 61%. The school is at 61% of revenue from last year. So the revenues are down. The expenses, if you'll notice, are 100%. They're just slightly over 100%. So one of the reasons that I wanted to take a look at this was because there were, last month we had flagged three or four accounts. I think it's 3 accounts that are currently in the red. And you'll see at the bottom, it's the special appropriations, the federal programs. I ignore food service. I know, Jimmy, you like that. That's just, it's all 100% funded, so I leave it alone. So special approps, federal programs, and federal COVID relief funds. Those accounts are currently overspent in this fiscal year. If you look further at those accounts, it's a little confusing to me. For example, those accounts are appropriated at $30,000. One of those accounts has $30,000 in it for materials and expenses, and there is $54,000 a month going out the door in salaries, with a line item that has 0 appropriations. Last year, the full Board of Supervisors had a list of questions that they sent over to the school with respect to the budget, and I know, Mr. Brand, you've been asking this question for a while. How do you decide which accounts you can spend in the red, and how do you deficit spend out of an account that has no appropriations? So the answer that came back last year was a journal entry would be done to move the money into that account so that it wouldn't be 0. We are 9 months into the fiscal year. Those accounts are still showing at 0, and they're still showing $54,000 a month in salaries expenditures. So a question that I think you may have, gentlemen on the board, considering the action that the board took. When did we have the audit? January 20, was it January we had the audit team came in to do their review? Anyway, after the audit team came in, the full Board of Supervisors took an action to preclude any spending that was in an account that had a deficit. These accounts have been in deficit now for several months. They're spending $54,000 a month in salary. Where's that money coming from? And what you'll see in the far right-hand column on this document that I gave you, I took a look at last year's closeout. I have to say I'm mightily disappointed that the county audit is not yet finished. We are now 9 months into the new fiscal year. This is the latest the county audit has ever been. It was November, then it slipped to December, then it slipped to January, now it's February. I find it inexcusable that we've hired an auditor that can't get this work done on time, because you are now in a position where you're looking at a county budget, and Mr. Tadlock, I think this impacts you the most, you're looking to try to do expenses estimates for next year, absent any information other than your own books about what happened last year. So I find it inexcusable that we're paying somebody that is this late. So what I did was I looked at the June 24 report up from the school. Absent any audit report, the most reliable information we have is the final expense and revenue report that the school publishes in July for June. That report usually is missing a couple, I don't know, maybe $1.5 million or so, because you pay teachers in July that has to get accrued back to June. So what I did, since I was concerned about these accounts in the red and I wanted to bring them to your attention, I wanted to see, look, does this all get resolved? Once the reimbursements start coming in from the feds, will these accounts get back in the black? That didn't happen last year. So what you see on the right-hand side is, last year, there was $26.6 million in revenue between the county, fed, state, et cetera. 23.5 in expenses. The school finished at a negative 708 last year, according to the June report. If you look at the percentages for the instruction category was 95% spent, administration 93. So you go down that list and what you see is that the Fund 1 accounts had revenue left in them, and the bottom accounts finished the year in the red. So federal programs was overspent by 3,600%. So there's no expectation. We're 9 months into this year. If those accounts continue in the red throughout the end of the year, you're going to end up with problems. And here's what my analysis shows. In the past, so the federal audit, our forensic audit report identified that the school has clearly overspent in the categories for the past several years, and they've never come to this body to ask to move money. Last year, the answer from the school leadership when asked, where did you find the money when you overspent? The answer to that was, and anyone can look this up, the answer to that was, we used federal and state funds to cover the overage. That's for 23 and before. If you look at these figures, based on the June 2024 report published by the school, Fund 1 is covering the federal funds. So what you've done now is reversed it. So now the federal funds aren't covering for the overage in the other accounts. The excess revenue in those accounts is covering for the federal funds. If you take the $2 million in reimbursements that are anticipated by the school, and I have to say, again, I'm disappointed in the county auditor. Last fall, the school came forward and said, we've got 1.6 in reimbursements that are already in the door, another 400 that we expect by the end of, I think it was November. That was in the September or October Board of Supervisors meeting. And then Mrs. Booth had to come here because the county auditor told her, this is on record, our county auditor, who is a paid contractor, told the school finance director she was not allowed to give you guys information until the auditor finished his job. So I find that confusing because if anyone knows what's going on in those funds, it should be the finance director at the school. So that's one issue that we've got going on with these reports. At last month's school board meeting, I'm going to pick on Dr. Curran, don't say anything, but I'm going to pick on you. At last month's school board meeting, Dr. Curran asked if the accounts, like the checks that go out the door, could start having the account code on them. Because one other thing that's going on with this expense report, I cannot get an answer from the school leadership or finance team if the expense reports that are published monthly, presented to the school board and the Board of Supervisors, represent the full expenses of the school. And here's why. There are 2 registers that are presented at the school board meeting each month, much like the county. One's a check register, I'm going to get the wrong words. One's a check register and one's a EFT, ACH, it's a automatic funds thing, right? I call it a check register because it's money going out the door. Those numbers, you cannot verify that those numbers and expenses are included in the monthly expense report. For example, The July 2024 expense report, posted and presented to the school board and approved by the school board, shows expenses of roughly $360 some odd thousand. The checks that were written that month and the AC and the automatic payments that went out the door that month totaled over $800,000. The expense report showed 360, the check register showed 800,000. Those don't match. So the question is, another question, if you look at this list of expenses, if you look at the 10.6 million in expenditures that have gone out the door, is that really what's gone out the door? Are we really at 100% equal to last year, or are we more or less? So we've got a question about what actually is going out the door, and that the reason it's so important, excuse me, these accounts are in the red. They were in the red last year. Even if you get the $2 million from the feds, they're still finishing 600 in the red, which means anywhere between 600 and 1.3 million in deficit spending last year in the school system. So we've got to get a handle on this. And yes, I did talk about this yesterday with the school leadership and the finance director. They were very interested in the analysis that I had done, and hopefully we'll have more conversations. Okay, so we've got that. I already complained about the county audit. All right, so we've got these accounts that finished in, okay, so then next we have, I want to shift to the chart of accounts for a second. I'm sorry, not the chart of accounts. It's the chart of accounts, but it's frankly the budget proposal. So the second document that I gave you, in December and January, the superintendent presented a draft budget to the school board. To date, the school board has not asked any questions. I'm not sure if they've given the opportunity, but in a public forum, there have been no questions about the budget. That budget is not the final budget, right? That's not the final budget. That is still in process, my understanding is. However, I want to call to the group's attention that the budget appears to be padded. So if you look at this document, what you see is the first column represents what is included in the superintendent's budget request for a 10% health increase to cover the cost of health insurance. That number is $245,700, which is roughly $246,000. If you take the total for the expenditures for Blue Cross and Blue Shield for last year, right, you can, in the chart of accounts, you can sort and pull out just that line item. If you pull out that line item and you multiply it by 10%, you come up with $204,000. So there's a difference there. The next one is a little bit bigger. If you take the 5% salary increase, if you take only the lines that are for personnel compensation, I think there are 1,000. Within the chart of accounts, there's personnel costs, and within that, you can further delineate, I think it's 2,300. Anyway, there's a code that you can further delineate for just pay. So not FICA, not benefits, nothing else, just pay. If you separate that line and you times it, you multiply it by 5%, assuming that there's going to be a 5% raise, you don't come up with 1.2 million that's needed in the budget, you come up with 641,000. And my number, I think, is inflated because honestly, I don't separate out administrative positions from instruction positions, because there's a difference in how the raises go for teachers versus administrators. The administrators usually get less than the teachers. And frankly, I didn't want to do all the work to separate it out, so this number includes a 5% raise for administrators, which isn't given. But right there, we've identified almost a $500,000 difference, $520,000 difference, that the budget that the superintendent presented is higher than what it looks like is needed. And I call your attention back to this document, which is the expenditure rates. If we're at 61% of the revenue from last year, but 100% of the expenses, one of two things is going to happen. We're either going to have a big fat deficit, or there was padding in the budget last year. And what we identified in the last month's meeting, where we talked about the allocation of the budget for this year, took $600,000 out of the instruction line item and added that elsewhere. You take $600,000 out of instruction, You still add $500,000 for pay raises, and there's still less money there. If you're on the same track of spending, that means there was more money that was needed last year in that budget too. And the reason that I'm banging away at this is because we have an assessment coming up, right? We've got the sheriff, we've got Chief Balderson, we've got everyone coming in here. We need things in this county to help people in this county. And if we've got more money that's needed in the school system, then we need to address that. These numbers are not made up, right? These are from, I've inserted, for anyone who's listening or anyone wants to know, I've inserted all the hyperlinks to the references on here so that anyone can check my math and check my work. And if we don't do something with addressing these overspending issues, then we're not going to have enough money to pay for everything else in the county, and you're going to have to raise our taxes. And Mr. Haney, last year I brought this up, and you said we were going to do an adjustment. If the assessments go up, right, we're going to do an adjustment to make sure we don't have too much money. And there's other issues going on in the school with the scores, the test scores, and some other things that I'm going to focus on in the future. But right now, we've got to get this budget stuff correct. So that's a little bit of a problem with where the chart of accounts is showing. Again, I don't know what the final school budget's going to look like. Maybe this will get corrected, but I'm ready to do the math on that. So the next area I wanted to look at real quick before we get to community engagement is the audits. So the county audit is problematic for me on a couple fronts. Only once in the past 4 years did the county auditor identify a problem with school spending. It was identified in, I think it was the 2022 report. There weren't invoices for expenses, and there was overspending in accounts. The very next year, the county auditor came back and said, that's all fixed. Everything's hunky-dory. That's not what the forensic audit said. Those two audits cannot live in the same world. They cannot live in the same world. So we have a situation where the forensic auditor was very blunt that we've been overspending. So the revenue had to come from somewhere. I think it's carryover. And the county auditor has said, everything's just fine. I'm very curious to see what the county audit says this year, because all these numbers can't possibly equal 0. And last year, one of the things I noticed in the county audit, and I raised this in the meeting with the county auditor, the school had a deficit of about $115,000 that was on the books per the audit. There was a lease that was done for exactly that amount. One of the questions the Board of Supervisors asked was, is this lease going to be an ongoing lease? So is this revenue going to be booked every year? The answer came back, what lease? Where did this lease come from? What is it for? Is it something that's going to be renewed? How did you magically have a lease that was for exactly the same amount for which you overspent? The auditor last year couldn't explain it. No one has been able to provide what this lease is. So part of my concern with the county audit, can we trust those numbers based on what's happened with the forensic audit? We'll have to look at that when it comes in. The last thing I wanted to address, and I know that the Board of Supervisors, you have a meeting at 6:30 on the corrective action plan. I'm not one to be patient, so you're going to get it now. I don't know what's happening in that meeting, so I just wanted to make sure that I shared this. And I've only taken a strong look. Luttrell, there's some things I think you might want to work on too, but I've only looked really at the school audit. There were 23 actions that were recommended based on the forensic audit report. There were 23 actions that needed to be done. 16 of those actions in the school report that was submitted are not addressed. So you have 16 out of 23 actions that the school approach is not going to fix the issue. For example, there's two that I'll pick on, there's two that I'll highlight that are, I think, super important for where we want to go in the future. One, the forensic auditor identified that the school board needs better market research skills. That is critically important when we're talking about contracts. And one area in which it is super important, right? So you've got health insurance contracts, you've got janitorial contracts, you've got service contracts, you've got everything. One area that has been in front of the public and the Board of Supervisors that has been very vocal for the past 4 months is the playground. The school board held a meeting on December 3rd, I don't remember. It was in December. They had presentations from 2 bidders on the playground. Both bidders said they were ADA compliant. One bidder presented a Cadillac version of the playground. Another bidder presented a version that was compliant per his bid, based on what he stated in the meeting. And he also said to the school board, and you can look this up, there's a recording of this, he also said, I'm very willing to work with the school board. If the budget that you have is less than what is here, I'm happy to go back and redesign so that we can meet your needs, be compliant, and meet your budget. To my disappointment, to my great disappointment, the school board did no further market research. They voted that meeting on the Cadillac version and brought that to the Board of Supervisors as the version that had to be approved, and it was only valid until December 31st. So the county auditor, the forensic auditor identified that the school board needs better market research skills. The answer that was given in the corrective action plan was, well, the county attorney looks at the contracts. Those are 2 different things. The county attorney isn't looking at the contract for market research to see if you've got the best bid. The county attorney, or whoever the school attorney looks at it to see if it's legally compliant. They don't look at it for market research. So that corrective action is not going to address the issue. The other one that is a little troubling, very troubling for me, is the issue about overriding the system for purchase orders and getting to above a limit where it's supposed to be. So the auditor sat right there and said, the systems can stop that. But the systems are being overridden. Now, there's perfectly legitimate reasons for systems to be overridden. Not everyone should be able to do it. It should be restricted. Once that system is overridden by anyone who touches it, you then book an expense greater at what you budgeted. The forensic audit clearly stated that the school was not going back and doing the reconciliation and making the budget amendments the way they should. So you have a problem where if in my personal life, if I wrote checks like that, I'd be bouncing checks all over the county, and probably Sheriff Beecham would probably have to come get me, right, at the rate that it's going like that. So the school's answer in the corrective action plan is not to stop the bounced checks, but to come on a regular basis to the Board of Supervisors and ask for the money to be moved. That's not an answer. What you're doing then is saying it's okay for us to continue to overspend because we're just going to come back and ask for it to be moved among categories because we know we have excess money up here that we can move elsewhere. It's basic bookkeeping, it's basic common sense, and I think everyone in this county probably feels the same way. There's no way I could manage my personal expenses the way the school's managing theirs. Absolutely not. Who'd come to my rescue? They'd come get my house or my husband's house. So it's not an issue of coming in for reprogramming. Now, that needs to happen. Right? We've had 4 years of overspending and there hasn't been one reprogramming request come to y'all, which is not consistent with Virginia code. So this plan needs to be redone. I'm not sure, again, I don't want to step on your toes for what y'all are doing at 6:30. In my opinion, this is not a corrective action plan. I don't know what this is, but it's not a corrective action plan. So the two recommendations I have right now are get this corrective action plan redone, unless y'all think it's okay. And then get clarification on what's going on with that expense report. When I checked with Mrs. Booth last fall, she said that those expenses were not yet included in the overall expense report, the monthly expenses out of the check register, but she was working on it. And I recognize that she's out now and the interim director has a lot of things on her plate, so it may not be something that is being done right now. It's something that clearly needs to be done. So I'm going to stop there and ask if you all have any questions and then turn for community engagement and get a drink. I need more caffeine, right? So what did I say that doesn't sound logical or that needs more clarification?
What's the last you've got from an auditor on the county audit?
As far as the timing,
Yeah.
I had contacted them because I hadn't heard anything. So I had contacted them last week, and they indicated that they would be, initially it was that they were going to work on the draft Friday, and then I heard back from them, and they were going to work on the draft today. But I have not heard anything further from them. So I did reach out because I hadn't heard anything.
Does that mean that they'll have it ready for our next board meeting, or does it mean it's going to be for the following one?
That was also my question, because I need that information to compile the county's budget. So what I asked, again, was whether they would be able to present that at the March meeting, or if it would be presented at the April meeting. And the response that I got was that it depended on how fast it could go through quality control once that report was drafted. So it purposely left the afternoon session lighter for the March meeting in the event that we can get the audit. So,
And I just have a feeling we won't see it till April meeting.
Will y'all get a chance to see it beforehand where it can be reviewed and commented on before he comes in and does his briefing?
Well, I know,
The only way I'm going to vote on to accept it, if we get it ahead of time and we can review it and questions be asked. And that's just speaking for me.
Oh, I didn't know that was up there. Et voila. Thank you, Morgan.
They let us down.
Thank you.
that is also posted on board docs too.
Oh,
Let us
Or
down.
the website.
Okay.
Excuse me, the website.
so for anyone who's listening online, the documents are posted.
another
I stand
conversation
corrected.
we're going to have. All right. I know we've had conversations over this 54,000 that's in our account. It's always in the red for salary.
For the funds at the bottom, yeah, it's,
Yeah. All right. Where does the money, which category is this money being transferred from?
Sir, I don't work for the school system. I see no transfers. If you look at, I printed this one out. This is the report that was run on February 10th. It'll be the latest report up until the school board meeting next week. There are $0 appropriated in line 1,000, which is personal services for, and this month there was only 18,000 in expenditure, so I take it back. It wasn't 54,000 every month. It was 18 this month for total. There's 0 appropriated, so there's not money being transferred in there at all.
So I guess it's just some magical thing that's happening. This money just kind of pops up in that account.
The answer we got last year was journal entries need to be done to either move the spending in the correct account or the funds in the correct account. This is a federal fund, so it has to be a reimbursement. We're 9 months into the year, and my understanding is the reimbursements are up to date, so I don't know if that means there's 0 reimbursements that are going to come in here, or they just haven't been deposited, or they haven't come in, so I don't have those answers, sir. My job is to stir up trouble and create questions.
That just keeps generating more and more questions.
And it's a problem because if you're at a position 9 months into the year where you're in the red and there have been 0 deposits, and last year you also finished in the red in those same categories to the tune of 2.26, 2.3 million. What's to say we're not going to finish in the red again? I have not gone back prior and done those analyses for prior years. I just looked at last year. So the issue is if you're in a deficit situation right now, when do you stop or what do you do so that you don't finish in a deficit at the end of the year? And if these expense reports that come to the board, the school board, these expense reports are submitted to the school board every month, and they're submitted to you guys. This is something that the board of supervisors gets. Are these accurate? If they're not accurate, are these deficits bigger? Are they smaller? Are the expenditure rates up here, are we really at 48.87 in instruction, or are we more? We don't know, and it's a risk again, the school manages their finances. The problem is when the county is asked then to cover those expenses, which is what looks like it happened last year. If Fund 1 had to cover expenses for the feds, then some of that had to be our money that did it. And if you're underspent in Fund 1, that money should be coming back to the county. And the next year's budget should be lowered. If you don't need that much money, don't ask for it.
That's correct.
And if you don't know that you don't need it, that's a bigger problem, which is not going to get through a meeting without saying it. Zero-based budgeting. You cannot do this without, right? For 1 year, all we need is 1 year of it, just 1 year of it. And Mr. Curran, I think, or Dr. Curran made I don't know if it was a motion or a recommendation at the last school board meeting, or maybe it was one before, I don't remember which one it was, that for this year's budget, the school needed to present last year's expenses, not just last year's budget. And I would recommend that the county do that too. Luttrell, I'm looking at you. Because part of what I think happened, I could be wrong, right? Part of what I think happened with the salary and health insurance increases, if you take the number that you used for last year's request and you add 10% or 5% to that, maybe that's how you got this higher number. Well, last year's request was not fulfilled. So you're basing your budget on a prior year request that wasn't fulfilled. So you padded extra, right? So absent zero-based, and you can do this because you have payroll, right? You run your payroll reports, you know exactly how much you spent in payroll. So it really, this year it's too late to do zero-based budgeting, it just flat out is. We've got to do something else for next year. Hopefully we'll get the expenses in the school budget this year. I don't know if that's for the school board to address, but I know it was requested for this year's budget, and absent that, all we have is expense reports to look at, and again, not knowing if the expense reports are accurate, we don't know what's going on. So I can't answer your question, Mr. Haney.
Well, I already knew that before I asked it.
Oh, okay.
But the biggest problem is when is this going to be corrected, and if it's going to be corrected? That's the two problems right there. And it keeps going on and on and on and on, and there's still no correction. So each year the accounting's getting worse and worse. You'll get to a point of no return here for long. It'll almost be impossible to correct it. Mr. Bryan?
It's for both sides, for the school system and for the county. At this point in time, we can talk budget. The auditors hadn't given us anything,
Nope, and don't expect that till April.
so we're gonna be behind the 8 ball again this year with budget. And the negative balances, I just think we need to stick with what we said we were gonna do, is just don't keep writing the checks.
We're gonna have to. There is no other way around it.
We take a few questions from community, or? All right, so we'll open it up for community engagement. If anyone has any questions about anything that I spit out rapidly or wants to challenge me on anything.
I can't stand it. This is insane. We've got a forensic audit that is as close to ground truth as we're going to get, and suddenly, when we finally get that thing done, now a different auditor, a statutory audit, is suddenly slower than it's ever been before. There's a reason for that. Well, a classification of reason for that. So we've got some kind of foggy explanation for plus or minus $2 million that's been messing around every couple years. And then we've got accounts that are overspent 3,600%. The rot continues even after a forensic audit report. And we have a statutory audit that's not going to help us. So as long as this rot continues, the ground truth that we currently have is not going to help us get to absolute truth and decent practices. That's the problem. There's a window that keeps moving to get things cleaned up, and it's moving to the right, and it's going to get out of our way. Something has to happen, because this isn't working. And it's not a challenge to anybody.
Yes, it is. You have to come up with a solution. You have to say, so if you were going to fix something, would it be, I don't know, different collaboration? And I know yesterday I had a very collaborative meeting at the school, and I'm willing to go back again. I don't work for the school, I don't work for anyone, so you can't trust, I won't say you can't trust me, but I shouldn't be in a position where I'm putting together people's budgets. All I can do is, analyze. But what would you do, Maurice, to take steps? Like, what would be your corrective action plan?
Your ZBB. That's one of them. But to have this meeting here, it's joint with the conspicuous absence of the other half that's supposed to make it joint. That needs to have consequences. This is supposed to be a collaborative effort, and it's not. And that's on purpose. It needs to change. There is clearly some padding going on. What I might do is say, whatever you think you've got going on over there on the other side, we're going to roll you back a few years until we can get a zero balance budget, and then we know where we've got ground truth, and then roll forward from there. And also, by the way, you mentioned an excellent case in point. Why are we submitting last year's requests instead of last year's expenditures? That's got to make headlines. Expenditures have to come with the budget request.
And on that, so you made me remind me of something else. Mr. Brand, you've been raising questions about this for a while. It looks like the COVID expenditures are baked in, and if you...
Yes, it does.
Right, so if you've got this much that was overspent in federal COVID relief funds, et cetera, I don't know if we're still at 100% of what the expenditures were last year, but we don't have that those COVID income, that COVID income. That's why I think looking at the real expenses is so important, because these expenses have to be baked in, or you would not have this much of a budget, and you would not have this. These data would not be the way they are.
And last year, Mr. Bryan told the schools, do not get used to that money. It's gone.
Well, it's hard. Once the feds allow out money, it gets addictive. It happens everywhere.
It is
But I
addictive.
think that I think is one of the things, Maurice, you bring up. I think absent looking at the expenses, if not from a zero-based perspective, from a true perspective on what's needed, somehow we have baked in the COVID expenses in the budget.
Yeah.
And we don't have the revenue to cover them anymore, and now that means you have to bump up the county revenue.
Right. Now, I know that there's folks within the county that are averse to the zero balance budget, but that's, at least initially, that's because of the level of effort that's rather intimidating. But you're not going to get a clean windshield on your path forward if you don't do it. It has to happen. And I understand that it can't happen this year because we're too late into the cycle.
It's too late this year. Yeah.
But it needs to happen. The process and any supporting processes that would support a zero balance budget need to be executed as soon as logistically reasonable and possible. We can't go on in the dark like this. We keep having these questions without answers every freaking year. And it's just got to stop. And sadly, the final word on that rests with the Board of Supervisors. I mean, the nuclear option anyways, since we can't seem to get cooperation out of enough of the members of the school board to even show up. I'm sorry, but it just seems like y'all are going to have to swing a little bit bigger hammer. Now, I don't want to bleed over onto other topics, so, but,
No, keep focused.
yes, ma'am.
Okay.
There's a number of things, and I did, I looked at the spreadsheet of actions that the forensic auditor provided. And I saw that as kind of a minimal approach, just a checkbox here and a checkbox there, but there was nothing in there, spare a couple of points, that would guarantee, or at least give some modicum of guarantee that this won't ever happen again, because this can't happen again. I'm challenged to keep my tongue tied relative to the notion that there seems to be a degree of inaccuracy that's A, just born of bad processes, and B, deliberate on some level.
This is malfeasance.
Yes,
This
it
corrective
is.
action plan, it doesn't address employee records. It doesn't address the fact that we don't have background checks on people in school. What it says is, for example, there's a lot of wordplay in here. Well, for current this and current that, it doesn't go back to correct things. There's a lot. I've made comments in multiple, spots on this, and I don't think they're probably fully, my comments are probably not fully addressing all the issues that could be there, but I really am disappointed. It looks like somebody just took the words that were in the forensic audit report, put them in a chart and said.
And then put a check mark in a
And put a
box.
check mark next to it. This is not, in any world I've ever lived in, a corrective action plan.
Nah.
None.
And I'm
And with the serious
not like
problems
her,
that
but
we
I've
have with these
dealt with
funds, yeah.
budgets in the billions, and this is insane. And since I'm not convinced that it's born of innocence in errors, because you do the same thing over year after year after year, after a while, it's no longer, but it needs to be looked at from a different angle. It truly needs to be looked at from a different angle.
And one of the other issues that we have here, and the superintendent's been very open about this, we're now at 5 finance directors in the past few years. So some of the answers in here are, I'm new. I heard the same thing last year when Mrs. Booth was new. And we have a superintendent because they're in charge of all of this. And so one of the things that continues to confuse me is you keep repeating the same problems. It's a new person, and so you give that person leeway. The same problems then get repeated. There is the head somewhere that needs to be held accountable for this.
Yes.
And I think that, again, I had a very collaborative and cooperative meeting yesterday, and I was very open about all of this too, that nothing here I'm saying is a surprise to anyone that might be sitting in the audience. And it's not personal. We've got to get this stuff fixed because our kids aren't reading right? They're not doing math right. We don't have employees in the county that we need. We're hurting our kids. And this isn't helping anybody to continue this type of financial issue. So I'm happy to help. I don't know when the budget when the school board might have a budget. And again, it's not my place as a citizen to, yes, it is.
Don't do that.
The school board has the ability actually to appoint committees and commissions. So if they don't want to participate in the Joint Finance Committee, then they can appoint their own finance commission to look at this. But I know there are citizens probably in this county that would be very willing to help out. You can't have everybody in your books, but this, I don't know another answer other than I continue to do what I'm doing for you guys, and you continue to bring it to the board. But we can't we're March 5th, thank you. We're March 5th. The schedule shows that there's going to be a school budget hearing on March 18th, 19th, 20th? Somewhere in there,
And it's a black box.
right? So the county calendar, the school published a calendar for the budget, the county published a calendar for the budget, and I have to say that the current budget issues with the school are not related to the Joint Finance Committee at all. So recommendations for sure at this point are we need to find out if those expenses are full expenses, because that's a difficult, and we need the corrective action plan. I also know that we've been asking about the number of employees at the school for a while. There's actually a website that I found that lists the employees at the school how many there are, what they're making, what their positions are. There's a public website, it does it for the feds, it does it for everybody. That website is only about 10 positions different from what the superintendent reports to the State Department of Education. So it's pretty reliable. So for at least 2023, there were 217, I think, positions, or maybe 227. Anyway, it lists, you know, what they are. Some of those folks may have moved on. But that's another question that we've been trying to get to, is how many employees there are. And the payroll, you should be able to whip that out of your payroll system. But if not, we have a control total, if you will, with this public website that's available, that shows the information, at least through 2023. So.
In the absence of more transparency from schools, that's the best we can do.
Well, and I appreciate the transparency that they have given, right? So this chart, the chart of accounts is awesome. Last year, you know, the expenditure reports by the codes is awesome. My understanding is that the system can spit out even more detailed information. It used to do it up until 2017. You used to be able to get the account code and some other information. So I'm optimistic, I'm hopeful that the school board will, or the superintendent will, you know, go for even more transparency, because that only helps, right? We need to help rebuild some trust here, and I think that goes a long way to do that. And like I said, if the school is making progress on the 2 million discrepancy in the revenue, it looks like it's only down to about 170,000 now, which is good, if the analysis holds up. So that would be a good sign. And if that comes out at the school board meeting on Monday, then I will publicly say thank you.
Roger that. Anyways, that's all I have for right now.
Any other thoughts?
So we are working on a budget. We would love to have one ready for our school board meeting on Monday. Just want to put that out there. Sometimes school systems do have money left over because it may be positions that weren't filled during the school year. It is a challenge to find teachers these days, and there may be, if you put in a budget for a mid-year teacher with benefits, you're looking at about, you could be looking, it depending on where you want to budget for that position. I mean, it could be $100,000 right there in one teacher. So if you don't fill those positions, yeah, you will have money left over. With the health insurance, you almost have to budget for every person, because you don't know whether or not they're going to take the health insurance or not.
Right. So for those online that can't hear, basically what the finance director is saying is, one, she thinks there might be a budget that's available at the school on the school board meeting on Monday. So please plan on attending the school board meeting to see the budget, everyone. The goal is to have it presented to the school board on Monday, which I assume would mean that the school board can't vote on it then, because they wouldn't have time to have reviewed it. I will be eagerly anticipating and looking at the documents to see if it's there. And the other explanation was that there's, you know, you have to budget for health insurance increases, even though some of them not use them. I'm not questioning that. When you have a $2.3 million hole and $2 million in revenue that's reimbursement, that's county money, right? This is an argument, we've all been down this road. Reimbursements are, by their nature, money that was fronted by the county and came back in. That's not money that can be respent by the school, right? And if you're at lower amounts in each of these categories, maybe it is that there aren't enough teachers, right? Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's something else. There's been money that's been returned for the last couple of years, which is great, which means, again, you don't need as much. And when you're talking 600, 700, 800,000 that's getting returned, let's take a look at that. Yep.
It may not be, it may be that the positions were just not filled. It may not be that you can just take them out of the budget. It was just a struggle to try and find teachers to fill the position.
An example would be our agriculture position. That's supposed to be a teacher. Right now, we are trying to address that with a paraprofessional. So that creates a gap. The other thing I would offer, the ESSER money, thankfully, has been spent. It's reimbursed. That's a good thing. There was a lot of money coming in, which perhaps created that return that you saw. So we should be heading toward a place of not having all those federal reimbursements and being able to really do better with that.
Well, and the good news for what I'm taking away from this conversation, you've got positions that are funded but aren't filled. Right, I seem to remember last year people saying that you were going to have to cut positions in order to absorb the cut that came last year. That didn't have to happen then if you've got positions. You didn't have to get rid of anybody, and you've got positions that you're hiring for that aren't filled, so congratulations. That is beautiful.
Well, hang on, there's a caveat to that, because we did have the agriculture teacher, but however, they left us.
Right, but they left before the budget was done last year. She was gone long before that.
There was another teacher who was supposed to be here.
So one teacher left, and it's not because the budget got cut.
That was just my example.
Yeah.
There are more examples.
But the great news is, again, you didn't have to lay off teachers, and you absorbed the cut, and you still have vacant positions. I have to say, congratulations on that. I think that's beautiful.
So the school board had worked with each of the principals, with the administrative teams to make cuts so that we could do the raise and cover the health insurance last year. We did that throughout the summer, which is why the contracts were a bit late coming out, if you will recall that, because there were a lot of things that happened late last summer.
But you were able to add money to the admin budget and the building and operations budget. So again, magic was done. I have to say congratulations. No, thank you. All right, any other thoughts or?
Well, another thing too is, it's hard, you never know when you're gonna have a student come into the county that is gonna have intensive needs, and you have to have a little bit of flexibility in a budget, just a little, because you may have a student that needs therapy, or, so you could have 5 of them just show up in a school year, and what are you gonna do if you don't, you need to.
So how much Medicaid reimbursement did y'all get last year?
I have not looked at those figures. I cannot answer that question.
And how much did we receive from students that were out of county last year? How many students did we have, and what was the income?
50 students, we do not charge out of county.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't know. I thought there was a stipend that came either from the state or from other counties for those students.
They count toward our ADM, or average daily membership.
So if we didn't have those 50 students, we'd be below 1,100.
And as long as, with out of county, if there's room in a classroom, we look at, do they have good attendance? Are they trying academically? And if there is room, we would never accept out of county if there wasn't room within a classroom. So I just want to be clear on that example. I believe our first grade is very large this year, so we had to have that, and we could not take any more out of county first grade students. So this isn't just Northumberland welcoming the whole world. There are requirements, and if our students do not meet those requirements, or out of county students, we send them back to the home county.
Does budget ever factor into how many students we can accept from out of county or not?
It would if we didn't have, class size is really a main thing.
And 1 to 11, we're pretty good, yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you. All right, so we have 5 minutes until the next meeting, so I would, unless Mr. Supervisors, plural, y'all have anything else? I would like to, Luttrell, anything that you have? I would like to kill this meeting at 6:26, so y'all have time to get ready for your next one. Does that work?
That's fine.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am.